Well, hello Glue Troopers, and welcome back to the TARDIS, where I have been working on the ship and made a lot of progress. Now, the instruction sheet does require you to actually sew the vacuum form sails on. I did get some tips and hints from folks about ways to make them out of cloth, material, paper, and other things, and probably would look better. But I'm making this for a friend of mine to go up on a shelf. I'm just going to stay with the stock kit. A little bit out of time constraints. Also, it's for its purpose, it works fine. And I'll probably detail out the yards, landlubber speak, the sails a little bit, but I want it to be pop bright and white because it's going to probably be up on a shelf, you know, and I want it to stand out. So the brighter colors will probably help a little bit with that. Again, the engineering on this model is pretty good. You know, it's not perfect, but I'm actually kind of happy with it. And, you know, it's like anything else. The first one, you know, you kind of learn by doing. If I ever get around to building another one, I'll know some of the mistakes I made, help keep the yard straight and everything. And I got one of them that was I started on too far to the side, but I thought about just cutting it off and redoing it, but it's a lot of work. I was like, well, again, up on a shelf. And of course, on the bowsprit, I'll have the yard arms, but I don't intend. I might make some out of some paper, some furled sails. I just think those yards that hang underneath the bowsprit just really mess up the lines. I like the way it looks. It looks racy. So other than stitching this thing, I had to drill the holes, and I think that I did the right number, but 20 on the main yard arms, and of course there's less as you get up, but of course some of them got a little out of place as you're moving. If you're going to do this, I recommend you get that extra set of hands to clip them into and work with, and don't work around the ship. I bumped it a couple of times through ham-fistedness. I got the work to go fairly quickly, and the detail level is okay for what I'm making with this, but if you really want to make an award winner, you're going to have to slow down and really take your time with that. Of course, I imagine if you're making an award winner, you're probably going to use some sort of a cloth sail, but you're still going to have to rig it. The kit is definitely not a beginner's kit, but so far, doing okay. Going to look fine. When it comes time to take pictures of the ship build, deliver to my friend, of course, I will be taking pictures at distance. There will be no close-ups where all the blemishes show. Also, my wife finished her Cara Dune character today, so she sent me a picture of that, and another one of her magnificent creations. A box showed up today from Mr. Zelensky, and as usual, I have slit the box open. I have not looked at the contents, and before I even open it, thank you, Mr. Zelensky. Just giddiness. And it's the Hobby Boss T26E4 Pershing. And it says pilot number 2, which means this would be one of the test vehicles, I believe. Let's see what the note says. I watched the Chieftain's hatch on the Pershing's always been one of my favorite tanks. I know it had a lot of problems. Hey Max, a little post-Christmas present for you. When I sent in my pics of my Tamiya 148 scale Pershing tank for reviewers build videos, you mentioned the Pershing was one of your favorite tanks. Hey, since I built one in 148, not being able to build this 135th Hobby Box kit that had too big for the space I have, so it's coming to your stash. Enjoy it. Happy New Year. Model on, the Samoa guy, John the Samoa guy. Dun 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 dun. Oh yeah, that's gonna happen. Now, guys, it is one of my favorite tanks, and John, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Now, the Pershing, I'll tell you one of the main reasons it's one of my favorite tanks. Even though, yes, I know it had all kinds of problems, but it formed the basis for the tanks that the United States Army would use for the next 6. Actually, if you want to include Marine Corps, usually 7 decades. It is to American tankers what the .45 automatic is to American military sidearms. Now, You can go out and watch the Chieftain's videos on him. He's covered it and he gets into all the detail. And yes, they had all kinds of problems with them. Most of you guys probably already know this, and I'm just going to go the quick 30-second history. Despite what a lot of people say, the Sherman tank did a fantastic job in World War II and is, by some standards, arguably the best tank made for a lot of reasons. And yes, I know that it didn't have the gun of the Panther or the sloped armor or any of that kind of stuff, but they were reliable, they were fast, they were easy to make, easy to ship, easy to keep running, to maintain. A lot of reasons. Just a good, durable, general purpose tank. Yeah, they had the problems. The early models of tracks were too thin, so they didn't have a lot of good flotation. They had the high profile because the originals had that radial airplane engine in them, which made them kind of easy targets. So on and so forth. People talk about, well, you know, they couldn't stop the German, 88. Like, nothing would stop a German 88. A Tiger tank couldn't stop an 88. And we took a lot of losses because we were on the march. We were always rolling into ambushes because the attackers are always at that disadvantage. But actually, it was an extremely survivable tank. Okay, enough about the Sherman. Point I'm getting at is the Sherman was a great tank. The Army loved it for a lot of good reasons. And but it wasn't until later in the war when we started going up against actually Panthers were the real ones that we said, oh my gosh, maybe we do need a heavy tank. Because the Army did not want a heavy tank. And we'll talk about this in live stream maybe, but heavy tanks slow you down, they're unreliable. The Germans had all these problems with their big heavy armor, and they really didn't have time and material to get it all worked out before the war was over. Although, yes, the late production Panthers were much more reliable, but they had their own set of problems. But the Army had set about making a heavy tank just in case, but it was considered kind of a low priority because the Sherman was doing fine in North Africa and all these places, and we were sending them to the Russians and the British, and they were having success with them. And the Japanese were terrified of them. I mean, the Sherman was the Tiger tank of the Pacific. Well, anyway, we kept working on it, and we had, I think it was called the M6, which kind of like a big Sherman. I'm not talking about the jumbo Sherman, and it still has a 75mm gun on it. But once we realized that, yeah, we are going to need a heavy tank, the T-26, which had gone through numerous iterations. I mean, like I said, go watch the Chieftain videos on them or some of the books out there. It's incredible the change they went through. But they finally got something that was still needed a lot of development, just like the early Panthers did. But it did get to the battlefield, even though I think it was a dozen of them, maybe, actually made it into combat. They were using the bridge at Remagen. There's the famous battle in Cologne where it takes out that Panther that knocked out the Sherman. That's, if you actually analyze that footage, it's actually pretty graphic. The first couple of Pershings in combat didn't fare so well, again, because they were on the attack. One of them got the gun knocked out. The first time the Germans came across, they didn't know what it was, but they shot at it. And it was actually, I think the first one was called Fireball, was the first or second one in combat, but I can't remember off the top of my head, but like one shot blew the muzzle brake right off the end of the barrel and put the gun out of action, and they popped a couple more 88 rounds that went into it, and I think most of the crew got out, but the tank was knocked out. And then another one to get up against it was a Rhino. It was that basically when the Germans put an 88 on a small chassis and used it as an ambush weapon, so it got knocked out. So they weren't having the best. I mean, no matter how much armor you put on a tank, these 88 90mm guns are going to go through it, especially with HVAP, high velocity armor piercing tungsten cored rounds. But eventually, one of the Pershings was the one laying the ambush, and it knocked out a bunch of German vehicles. I forget offhand, it knocked out like 2 Mark IVs, a Panther, and I think a half-track. It knocked out 4 or 5 vehicles. So, you know, in tank warfare, like a lot of basically gunfights, usually the guy who shoots first wins. And of course, there was the incident, the thing in Cologne and Remagen, but the tank did, you know, get its baptism of fire, and the Army clearly had a lot of work to do on it, but they had a few years to do it, and by the Korean War, it was a much better tank. Of course, by then, and it's a good thing we had it also, because don't forget, at the end of the war, the Russians are coming out of the JS2 and the JS3, and these monstrous tanks were beasts. They scared the crap out of us. Luckily, we didn't know how bad they were, but they still had massive guns, incredibly sloped armor, And at least we had a heavy tank if we had to get in a slugfest with them. And later on in the Korean War, where the Pershings and I think even some early model Pattons were used, and it was a really capable platform. It just needed some maturing, and eventually it got it. And the Pershing evolved into the Patton 1, 2, and 3, M46, M47, M48. Some people call the M60 the Patton 3 because the M60 tank, main battle tank that we used while I was in the Army, I was actually in the Army when the M1 Abrams XM1 was first coming online. And but and they're still, the chassis are still used, I think, on certain kinds of recovery vehicles and stuff. So all of it has a direct line to the Pershing, which again, just one of my favorite tanks. Even though it was trouble plagued, it was a good balanced heavy tank, which years later would basically be described as a medium tank. But so thank you, John. I really appreciate that, and I'm gonna go put that in the stash of the armor vehicles right away. I want to get into some armor at some point. Just so many models I want to build, so many things I want to do, and only so many hours in a day. I'm going to have to live to be a very old man to get all this built. I'm good with it. So, guys, that's it for tonight. Again, planning a live stream Saturday night, 7 o'clock. Good Lord willing, and the river don't rise. And you guys take care of yourselves. I keep looking at my shoulder to make sure I'm not forgetting something. That really is it, guys. Take care of yourselves. And as always, model on. Well, that's it. Take care of yourselves. And how long do I have to hold this smile? Don't touch. Very delicate. Tankity, 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 tank. Oh yeah, this is the test model. Says it's the external braces and recoil mechanism for the gun. Models, models, I love models. Don't step on the cable! Haha! Didn't step on you this time. He says as he goes butt over tea kettle.